So it's a very warm welcome today to the Global Business Podcast to Kimberly Faith. Kimberly, how are you today?
I am terrific, but not as good as you sailing around the world, Mark. So I have to tell you.
Well, I wish I was sailing around the world, because before we get everybody writing in and saying, well, he's not actually sailing around the world at the moment. That is true. I'm not, but I am sitting on a beautiful sailboat and very happy to be here. But tell us, whereabouts in the world are you talking to us from today, Kimberly?
Today, I am based in Greenville, South Carolina. So I'm usually on the road traveling all over the world as well. But I've been home for 5 months, which is a record for the past 10 years.
Well, I've got to tell you, I was super excited to talk to you today because I've got history in Greenville, South Carolina. And
no way.
No, I have. And it was way back. And we're talking a couple of decades ago when I was in the corporate world. And my very first overseas trip for business was to Greenville, South Carolina. Can you believe that?
Funny. No, I cannot. Talk about a small world.
So there was I have to rack my memory now, but there was a company called Textile Industries in Greenville,
Sure.
South Carolina, and that's who I visited. And I had a wonderful time there. I loved it. It's a beautiful part of the world.
Greenville is beautiful. This part of the country is absolutely beautiful, Mark. You're right. So I love it. I always love coming back home here. I have a nice view of the mountains, so lots of green.
Lovely. Now, as you know, I was just telling you off air that I do a travel show as well. So why don't we plug Greenville? Why should people come to Greenville? What are a couple of the attractions there for people to come to that area?
Greenville is best known for its fabulous downtown. And so we have this beautiful street that had the result of the vision of community leaders coming together 20 years ago. We have a beautiful river, waterfall, and lots of industry in this town, Mark. And it's just a fascinating, forward-thinking, visionary community with lots of breweries, lots of restaurants. We are named in the top 25 of all kinds of lists in the U.S. And I keep saying, shh. Stop telling everybody about Greenville.
That's a very good thing. So it sounds like we should all come there and start a business up. It sounds like a great environment for a business.
It is.
Yeah?
It is. It's terrific.
Now, what I do on my show is I allow my guests to dedicate their show to someone special in their life. So who would you like to dedicate your show to today?
You know, I would like to dedicate this show to the young professionals that I coach, Mark. They have been inspiring me. These are 600 to 900 young professionals that I've been working with over the past few months and from all over the world. And they give me hope for a better future for us all.
Fantastic. What's the youngest age of one of these professionals?
22.
Wow, fantastic. That's tremendous, isn't it? And that is inspiring, isn't it, to hear those stories?
It is. And they keep me inspired. And I love the fact that they're no longer tied to the almighty dollar. You know, they know that they can make money, but they also are much more committed to making a difference. And I think both you and I appreciate that.
Yeah, we absolutely do, coming from the generation we do. Now, you're a systems thinker, a futurist, and a thought leader. I'm very interested in the futurist part. Is this something like Elon Musk? Are you going to be up on Mars training people how to do business up there as one of the first people?
No, what a futurist really is, although I do respect what he's doing, futurist is about seeing things and connecting the dots in a way that most people don't. And what I find is that whole systems thinking discipline gives you the chance to be able to look much farther down the road. I love that space. I know no other way to see the world, to be honest with you.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Do you think people lack vision a lot of the time? Do you think they don't think too big?
That's absolutely what the issue is. And in fact, I've started doing much more training about that because people were literally forgetting how to create a vision. So, Mark, a vision is when we are able to articulate what does not yet exist. So we're not colored by anything in the past. And that takes a different kind of thought process.
Are great leaders born or are they made?
I believe they're awakened when something matters.
That's a very cool way. And can you give me a little bit more on that? Why particularly awakened?
Because I believe that we're each born with this innate sense to actually fulfill our purpose, and we spend a lifetime figuring it out, but we become lulled to sleep, Mark. I mean, I've seen it many, many times. We become lulled to sleep. We get very busy in our careers, and we forget about whatever it is that makes our heart, our soul sing. And so I believe awakened is when we all of a sudden find what that purpose is, and we become courageous enough to fight for it, to stand up for it, to do whatever it needs to do. It's almost like a calling. We can do no other thing because it is that important to us.
Takes a lot of courage to get to that stage. What do you think stops a lot of people from really jumping in, boots and all, and taking on their passion in life?
We tend to hold ourselves back with fear. And what I have found, I lost everything 10 years ago, and I started my life over, and it ended up being an incredible blessing, because from that point on, I learned that there's nowhere to go but up. There's nothing else that can be taken from me that I cannot recreate for myself. And I almost wish I'd had that experience earlier, because it made me fearless. And I think that's what they're paralyzed by fear.
Yeah, true. So you came to a crossroads in your life, and that was a catalyst or epiphany for you changing direction. Is there anything else you can share about that particular time? Because it must have been a very inspiring part of your life journey as well.
It was. What happened is, when my daughter was 6 years old, I was already in the consulting business for a very long time. I started earlier in my career, from my early 20s. My daughter, I ended up launching a business in the retail industry, which, Mark, was completely opposite of anything that I'd ever done. But I felt compelled by this vision that my daughter had to create a company where we could inspire women and girls to know that they were beautiful just the way they are. And so we ended up launching this company. I found investors. I had raised almost $1 million in investments. I had licenses from Warner Brothers, from Disney. I mean, truly an incredible story. And through a series of, I don't even know how to explain it anymore, an investor that had undiagnosed Alzheimer's, and through a series of events that just took us down a bad path, we ended up having to close the business. Broke my heart. Can you imagine having to tell my 11-year-old daughter, who was the self-appointed vice president, by the way? Imagine me telling her that sometimes dreams don't come true. Very, very tough place in life.
Looking back on that, hindsight's a wonderful thing that we all have the opportunity to dig into sometimes. Looking back on that period now, what did it really teach you about life and about business?
It taught me two things. One, not to trust anyone else's voice more than my own. That I kept going to other people for their advice. I kept trusting investors more than myself. I kept trusting the experts more than myself. And Mark, I knew what needed to be done, and I did not believe in myself enough then. Okay.
Self-belief's a huge thing, isn't it?
It is a huge thing. And then the second thing is don't be afraid to dream. I know that did not end well for me. And at the time in my life, I would have told you it was the worst thing that ever happened to me. But now looking back, it was the leverage for my life that has brought me to the place that I am today. And I wouldn't be the same person without it. So I'm in fact now grateful for it.
Yeah, beautiful. What tips would you give someone listening who's going through that kind of period at the moment and struggling with a few directions in their life? What tips would you pass on to them to say, hey, the sun's going to come up tomorrow. It's going to be shining again.
Well, that's actually my number one tip. Funny that you say that, because that was actually one of those things, is that I trained myself to learn that every day the sun comes up. And no matter how bad the day was, and no matter how difficult it was, the nighttime would fall, and then the next day would be a new opportunity. So count on that sun coming up. The second is time really does heal, Mark. I would not have told you this, 10, 12 years ago, that I thought I could ever overcome this. But time really does heal. People pass away, life changes, new things happen, and it becomes a chapter that's like a far away distance where you're looking through the telescope, far away. And so I would count on the fact that time does heal. And third, keep yourself open to reinvention. That taught me that I had to reinvent myself over and over, and I know that's a passion of yours. Reinvention is a beautiful thing. Give yourself space to do that. Yeah,
it certainly is. And I guess at the moment too, with what we're all going through, learning new skill sets is paramount to where we can be in the future. And you're 100% right in what you say, as far as I'm concerned too, because you can empower yourself with so many different new things if you decide to be more open to them, right? And it's just about being open. And you probably relate to the word consciousness. It's about living consciously through that process as well and embracing it. So I think we're on the same page there, Kimberly. What got you into consulting? What was the passion behind that?
What was interesting is my first job out of college, I was working with a small chamber of commerce. I had the opportunity to work with Dr. Peter Singhi, who had published The Fifth Discipline. I worked with his entire team. And so there I was teaching this community all these principles around systems thinking from the time I was 23 years old. At 27, I was recruited by another couple who had a small consulting company. And so at 27, I started consulting with companies like GE and Dell, very young to enter the consulting business, but I was one of the few out there actually teaching systems thinking. So it found me. I did not find it.
Great way of putting it. What did you find so hard back then when you were that young, being in that role? Because as you say, that's a very young age to be in a consulting position. Did you find it hard to get credibility amongst those that you were working with and for?
Well, I had two strikes against me then. So one, I was young, and two was I was a woman, because back then I usually was the only woman in the room, or one, maybe two out of 50. And so, yes, both of those things were challenging. It took me time to be able to get over that, but it was a matter of learning to have faith in myself and faith in what I knew. I mean, I knew my craft, and early on, I saw what an impact it would make with people, Mark, and I began to have faith in what it is that I brought to the table. Took me a while to finally own that, but I did end up doing that.
Yeah, wonderful. Was this the dream job from when you were back at school? Is that what you always wanted to do?
You know, what I wanted to do since I was a child was be an author. From the time I was in the third grade, I have always known I would write a book. It was like, some kids grow up to be a firefighter. Some people grow up to be a nurse. I knew I had a love affair with words from the time that I could read.
Let's talk about books, because they are a big part of your life and you've been very successful. Your Lion Inside is one of your most award-winning books. Tell us about that.
It is.
I'm gonna throw that up on the screen actually right here, because I've got a copy of it here. Now, tell us about what I like to talk to authors about the most is the journey of actually writing a book. How was it for you? Because not just the outcome is important. I find also writing a book is very therapeutic in lots of different ways. How did you find it?
It's full of self-discovery, actually, because what happens is it ties into your purpose, is that you feel this calling in your heart, and your unique set of experiences begin to show you something that you say, wow, I really think people could benefit from this. And as you test it out, you see people go, yes, please give me more. When are you writing your book? And you're like, oh, well, I probably ought to do that. And so for me, it was a matter, I wasn't very linear about it, Mark. A lot of people have to have a very linear plan. I had a dream one night. I saw the cover very clearly in my dream. I worked on having a cover first, and then everything else, it began to happen. I was given very good advice to allow the book to birth itself. Do not force the book, but allow it to come to life.
So are you somebody that has to run away to a secluded destination to write quietly, or can you do it from your surrounds at home?
I am better in quiet places. Yes, there was a time or two I had to send my husband away. But what I found, oddly enough, is it came to me in the middle of the night. I can't tell you how many times I woke up at 2:59 a.m., flooding with chapters flooding through my head. And so I began to train myself just to get up, write it down. And sure enough, those became the fundamental basics of the book.
How long did it take you to write that book?
It took me a good year and a half, for me to really get it. And I've since now republished it. So the copy that you're seeing there was republishing, because I went ahead and had my first edition out, even though I knew it wasn't perfect, Mark, because I knew the timing was important, and I knew better things were done was better than perfect. And I knew that I was going in relationship with this book, with this content. I knew how important it was. And so I started somewhere, and then sure enough, I became better and better and better at it. And then by the time this edition came around, that's when all the awards started to come forth. Brilliant.
It's ironic, isn't it? The more we test out things and put our heart into it, the more success we have. And we learn so much through the process as well. I believe everybody's got a book inside them. What tips would you give to people out there who'd love to write a book but haven't actually, started anything yet?
To me, it's a matter of, number one, start making voice memos to yourself. What I learned over the years is that it's very easy to lose those nuggets of wisdom. Some of us are disciplined to write it down. I found I had better luck recording voice memos on my phone to myself with a date and whatever it is that I learned that day. Those voice memos saved me because I used a lot of that information. The second tip would be to go ahead and bring the cover to life. Hire yourself a designer, go ahead and get a cover so that it becomes real to you. For me, seeing my name on the book, it became very real. And third would be go into relationship with a book. What I see people sometimes do is they kill the creativity by trying to make it so structured. And I understand some people need that structure, but I encourage people to go with the flow. See where the book wants to show up. It can always be put back into a flow later on. Tap into the energy of whatever the book has to say that day.
Yeah, that's great advice. I remember back to the first time I wrote a book, and I didn't start at chapter 1, and some people found that quite unusual because I went with the flow as well, and sometimes the flow was actually the ending of the book, which helped me design the rest of it in my head and created that flow. So it's no set pattern, is it? It's really what makes it work for you. Also, in timeline, I just finished my latest book. It took me 6.5 weeks to write my latest book, and it was purely because I could not stop writing. It was once you get into the flow, I think being on a sailboat helps a bit as well, Kimberly, I must say. But,
less distraction.
Less distraction. But once you get in the flow with it, it becomes part of your life journey very quickly, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. To be honest with you, Mark, I could write all the time. I do a lot of writing and articles right now. So the content keeps coming. When you tap into the universal flow, when you've learned how to tap into that universal consciousness, and you can become a conduit for what the greater messages are, it is a beautiful place to be.
Yeah, love it. Now, one of the statistics that I found extraordinary when I was researching you a few days ago was you've coached 30,000 leaders in your time. 30,000, that's a lot of people. If we put those in a big sports stadium, it's enormous, right? It just blows my mind away. So there must be lots and lots of lessons from coaching those people. What are a couple of the standout attributes of leaders that you've seen through your years of coaching all of these people? Is there something in particular that stands out as, say, 3 main attributes of a good leader?
Sure. Now, I actually could dive that into, divvy it up between different levels and categories and all that, but I'll try to put them in 3 chunks for you, Mark. That's a big, important question. The first one would be to commit to be a lifelong learner. What I found is that some of the most inspiring leaders I've met, they own their value and what they know, but they never assume that that's the end of the sentence. They simply always keep it open because they know that there's more to learn. So that was the very first thing. There's always this kind of sense of adventure. So be a lifelong learner. The second one is to be mindful on which syllable you place the emphasis. So I have many people that I've run into leaders that are solely focused on themselves, and that only goes so far. You can only walk the talk and do all of those things. And when people know there's nothing else behind that, it comes to an end. So I talk about in which syllable, what's important to you? What's that authentic self side of yourself? What is your purpose in leadership? Because I think that's really important. And third is I really think we've lost a little bit this, Mark. I believe leadership is a sacred honor. When I see the leaders who have made a difference, they treat it as a sacred honor. Leadership is not about the title that we're given. It's about the movement we make through the world. It's about the visions that we create. It's about the people that we inspire. And so I've seen leaders that actually really do take that very seriously. This is an honor for them. They don't even need the title. It's simply secondary to them. And that makes all the difference in the world.
I'm so glad you said that. I had the privilege a few years ago of meeting Nelson Mandela and sitting in the man's presence for a luncheon and being very close to him. And he is the epitome of what you just described in terms of a person that was so humble about his position in life and how hard he was prepared to work in the dream and to realize that goal. And it made me think of that time, exactly what you just said, actually, in terms of we've lost that thing in society where everybody thinks they're a leader. Everybody thinks they're an expert about something. And I'm so glad that you've said that. Is there anybody out there that inspires you in that particular role who really embraces their leadership as an important attribute for their whole life and what they're doing in the world?
I'm a big fan of Brene Brown. What's been so intriguing to me to watch her work is I've watched her from early in her career, and she became very real about what her message was for the world, even though emotion and vulnerability was not what was popular. And what was intriguing to me was to watch her step into that space because she knew what she knew, Mark, and there was no other question about that. And that heart-centered leadership, I think, is what people are clamoring for today.
Do you think we're seeing a shift in society? You mentioned before with the younger people, and I see that myself, where younger people are coming into leadership roles now and they see business and the world in a different vision. That's a good thing. It has to be, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be what I think saves us in a direction that we need to go, because I think we've lost our way. There are too many leaders that I have, I've sat and listened to lots of leaders' presentations. And what was alarming to me were the number of people who lost sight of that this was more important than the dollar. I'm all about business, Mark. I get that. I want people to be profitable in their business so that they can reinvest in society. But when I saw more leaders, okay, in quotation marks, spending time on simply beating the competition and never mention the well-being of the employees and never mention the difference in society and never ask themselves, what are the unintended consequences of the decisions that we're making? I began to lose a little bit of heart, I'll be honest with you, over the past few years, because I saw a marked difference between the two.
What do you think's been the shift and the change? Is it purely a generational thing, or has there been a new education process that's been driving that as well?
I think there is an awakening in consciousness that's driving a lot of it. I believe that people are much more open to what are the masculine leadership principles that are important and the feminine leadership principles that are important, and both of those are inside all of us. I believe education in some ways, Mark, I know people may not always agree with this, but I've watched education be a little bit of a trap. In the past 100 years, I've watched us think that we have to go to get letters behind our name or go to a university in order for someone else to make us credible. And I'm watching that turn us into almost a group think society. And I think that's to the detriment of all of us. I don't think that that's going to be what takes humanity into the next generation.
Oh, you've just cut off my hands there, because I gave my little 3-year-old puppy dog a title the other day. And I gave him 3 letters after his name, WPA. He's the World Peace Ambassador, because everybody that meets my puppy loves him. And he asked me for a role in our new organization. I said, you can be our World Peace Ambassador. So I've put those 3 letters after his name.
Love it.
And
I like those 3 letters, Mark. I like those.
You're okay with that one? Okay.
I'm okay with that one. I think that one's great.
Now, the reason I'm having people like you who are outstanding individuals on my show is to talk about these rough times that we're going through. And there's a lot of people out there in the world at the moment in business who are struggling for all kinds of different reasons. So right. I wanted to get some of your views about coping, not only coping with COVID, but also thriving during this period of time, which a lot of people are, I know that. But let's back up first before COVID came along the scenes. And what did you have planned for 2020 before COVID was here? Did you have great visions for your business this year?
I sure did. I was already booked pretty much through the end of the year. So I already, I was almost, my entire year was already booked with doing training programs and keynotes all over the world. And so I thought the year was set. In fact, I was supposed to leave for Paris on the Friday. Everything began to shut down in my region on a Wednesday, but I was supposed to be in Paris for the next 2 weeks teaching. So it was like a screeching halt when I was like, wait a minute, this wasn't what I planned. How is this happening? So, and it was a difficult time. I think it was a difficult time for many of us because the urgency and the suddenness of it all was a bit shocking.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because it affects people in different ways. And I've been saying on the show that, we've got the business side of it, but we've also got the human aspect side of it, which is as equally as important, if not more important.
Yes.
And, people are businesses and businesses are people. So when the news hit you and you've got this long list of travel schedule for the rest of the year to go out there and be positive in what you do around the world, how did it actually impact you personally? What were some of the things that you took on board to keep yourself centered around that?
So first, I had to acknowledge the feelings that came along with it. Everything came to such a screeching halt. And what was challenging for me, Mark, and I know many like me that were like independent contractors that companies actually hire, it was the fact that you have given so much to these companies, and all of a sudden, everything, the faucet was turned off 100%. It wasn't even turned off 50%. It wasn't turned off, just we need to slow down. It was a screeching halt. And I'll be honest with you, for a moment, I had this almost crisis in, I don't want to say identity, but I really wanted to ask myself, do I still want to invest in this? Because if there is such a lack of understanding and willingness to accept that these people that I call all the time, like me, at any time, to give and give and give, and then all of a sudden we reach this crossroads and then dropped like a hot potato, it really made me rethink about what was important for me to invest my life.
Yeah, great point. And I think acknowledging how you feel is very important. I think a lot of people have been trying to deny the feelings they've had during this process, in particular in relation to their business, and thinking, well, it's going to be okay, it's going to be okay. Well, that doesn't allow you to be perhaps as flexible as you need to be in this time and look for other options and all the rest of it. So you just mentioned that your clients basically turned off the faucet overnight. What did you do then? What was the strategy that you put into place to get yourself out the other side?
First, I became very innovative in making sure that I stayed on the forward end of the curve about offering things virtually. So I was one of the first out there. Second is I allowed it to be still. I allowed it to be still for a while. And systems thinking, you learn a lot about, most people, when something pushes on you, you want to push back, and you end up into this pushing dynamic. And what we talk a lot about is receiving the push differently. Instead of pushing back, kind of step back and receive the push differently. Let it wash over you and see where the leverage is. And so while I stayed ahead of the curve and making sure that I was up on my virtual skills, I did relax for a little while. I did a lot of self-reflection and I stopped pushing and let it be what it was.
Yeah, that's a great thing. And I think quite difficult for a lot of people because their normal human behavior is quick, let's pivot and let's get on to the next thing without actually taking time for reflection. Also, I would say that during this time, though, we've been blessed with the amount of time we have had to reflect. And therefore, it's changed a lot of people's lives, both physically, emotionally, and spiritually, as we go through the journey.
Yes.
So how did you communicate as far as what was going on with your customers? What was the interaction that was going on? Was it simply a case of them saying, look, we don't need your services anymore? Or was there a strategy coming from them saying, look, we're going to take another look at this in a month's time or 2 months' time? Or
the fear shut everybody down. Is unlike anything I've ever seen. And so especially when you're in large organizations, I mean, I work with the Amazons and the Microsofts and the GEs, the BMWs, a lot of those large companies. When there is uncertainty, it shuts down. So there was like, that's it. The faucet's off. Now, it started to come back after about 90 days. There was some warming up once people had some time to think, but that was not the way it started, which is what struck me was I was like, wow, that was kind of cold. Because I think of all of us, I think back to the waitress that all of a sudden overnight no longer was even able to receive her tips. I mean, there was a way for us to slowly begin to make this happen that it did not have to be as severe as it ended up being.
Yeah, right. And what about the compassionate side that you just mentioned? Because I think that's a very important aspect of this as well. We tend to go inward when we have all these challenges throwing upon ourselves, but there's always a lot of people that are out there suffering worse. How did you see that within your inner circle in your community, whether it be family members or people that you worked with? Were there a lot of people hurting and still hurting?
There were a lot of people hurting, but I will give a lot of my fellow colleagues credit because we immediately shifted. Once the shock wore off, we shifted into how can we serve? How can we serve? So understanding that this was a crisis for us collectively as humanity, how may we serve? And what was interesting, Mark, is that I started to offer a number of free webinars, which many in my industry did, but people were open to discussing the emotion behind it in a broader and more open way than I have ever seen in my career. It was almost like the veneer of consciousness around humanity slightly shifted, and all of a sudden the things that we needed to deal with were laid right out there before us. And that was powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we're in unprecedented waters when it comes to business. It doesn't matter how much experience you and I have had. We've never been through a situation that is currently in the world today. So how does that make you rethink about your business model per se and the strategy going forward? You talked about the online world. Can you tell us about what you've done to pivot into that?
Sure. So last week I was teaching every single day last week. So moving into these online things, had time to create a lot of new content. So many things that I didn't have time to do before. And what's interesting when you tie back to young professionals, because you bring up another point, my daughter graduated from college in December. She moved 6 hours away, started her first job the end of January. She wasn't even in her first job 6 weeks when the whole world changed. And she would call me sometimes and say, well, what do I do? What do I do here? And I'm like, hon, this is new territory for everybody. There is no playbook for this.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting, though, isn't it, that the kids turn to their parents and say, hey, what's the advice? Because they do see parents as the leaders and the know-alls as well in terms of giving that advice. But as you say, none of us have been in this position before, and it's a very unique position. So what about the inner circle of consultants? Is it a community that you've come together and help each other as well?
There were many of us that did when we first started, and now what I'm noticing is everybody's kind of figured out their niche. So executive coaching is going strong. I still receive a lot of calls. A lot of my colleagues receive calls. People are saying, okay, it looks like this is going through the end of the year. How do we still invest in people and train them? So I'm watching a kind of another wave of hope, and that's a good thing. And that's needed right now because there's also a level of weariness that's setting in. You know, we as humans, the neuroscience shows that we're not very good with uncertainty. We're 5 times more wired for fear than any other emotion, and we would rather have bad news than no news. And that's the kind of the phase I see some of us in now. It's like, okay, now what? And so it's helping us each fortify ourselves. Somebody's up one day and somebody's down, and the next day that person is up and the other person is down. And I think that's the grace that we're all offering to each other.
Have you seen people that have been close to you dropping out of the industry at the moment?
Everybody's still holding on to hope. So I have not seen a strong dropout yet, but I'll be honest with you, Mark, I'm sure those things are going to be tougher as we go through the end of the year. I think everybody's kind of set their vision on 2021 so that we can have hope there, and that's where they're at. So everybody's taking it a week by week time.
So what's it like for you, somebody who's a global jet setter, business lady, traveling the world doing your trade? How's it been not getting the passport out every day?
I know. You know, that was a bit of a shock to the system. I never knew I would actually miss airports, right? So what was interesting, though, is that I actually had to be reminded that I'm actually an introvert. And so when I traveled, I would have my nights to myself. I would, be alone in the hotel room. And so it wasn't an issue when I came home because I had that time alone. It was a nice trade-off. Being with someone 24 hours a day now for 5 months, I had to learn how to articulate saying, I love you, but I just need not to talk for the next 12 hours.
But a major benefit with no jet lag. Are you someone that suffers terribly from jet lag? Somewhat. I'm actually work very hard to stay healthy, but I'll be honest with you, Mark. I actually have a nice setup now, and I may not go back to the kind of life I had before. I may be very selective and pick and choose what I do around that. And I've grown my online following with Facebook Live with the women with my book. And I have built new relationships and new avenues, and that's been fun. You've tapped into the next series of questions. So I was going to ask you now, have you really changed, or are you in the process of changing your business model where you don't travel as much? And you've just answered that. So how important is it in terms of that online world and how you engage with people? How are you finding that to be a new dynamic for you to the level that you're doing it today versus before?
When I've trained all these people over the years, I became very good at reading the energy, at tuning into the energy, going into resonance with my audiences. I didn't even know it was energy for many years. I just simply knew I connected. Now I know the power of energy. It took me a shift to be able to do that online, and I didn't think it was possible, but now it is. Now when I'm with my Facebook Live group, the women that follow me, and I have women from all over the world, I can shift now into that energy. So it's taken me to a new level of understanding, and that's exciting.
Has it changed the way you actually communicate?
Sure. I've had to become much more comfortable with video. That wasn't something that was one of my favorite things to do. I could do it, but I always preferred to be in person. Now it's a matter of how do I send my energy and share my heart and still share that love and inspiration and hope through the others, through the tech world here. And it is possible. It is possible. I can feel the love as the group that so between March and now, I've learned a lot through the lessons too.
Now, this world is becoming important. I talk about the online world as people get out there and learn new opportunities to get online with their businesses. For those people that are a little bit insecure when it comes to getting online, what are a few tips you'd pass on to them now in terms of getting their confidence up to use online technology?
Find someone that you can trust to test out some of the new tools. Like one of my favorite combinations now is Zoom and Mural. Mural is an online whiteboard, a collaborative whiteboard. I had no idea how to do it, and I started there, and it ended up being quite fun and better than what I expected. So find someone or one or two people that you can safely try out some of these new things. Second, it's okay for you not to be an expert in everything. And I think it's good for us to try new things, but don't even try to be an expert in everything. Find your runway and stick with that. And then third is have a sense of humor. I kid you not, we will have everything all set out and it will work perfectly 1 hour, and then something goes wrong the next hour. The other day I had all my trees were falling and my background is falling. I'm like, okay, I have to have a sense of humor because everybody's now in my home, and that's a level of vulnerability that I think many of us haven't been there before.
And that's really interesting. I find that really interesting because I've only been doing these video podcasts now for the last few weeks, and prior to that, everything was done audio. So nobody was seeing the inside of my sailboat and my little comfort world here. So I agree with you. It's something that some people are not too comfortable with, and we're seeing more and more people's kitchens than we've ever seen before, and food preparation and all those sorts of things. So it's a whole new
kids and dogs.
World. Yeah, absolutely. So what's the next 2 years look like? What are you doing as far as planning your business ahead? How far are you planning ahead at the moment? What do you see as the future?
That is a tough question. So my biggest focus is how may I serve? So I am doing a lot of research on some of the things that I have questions about what's happening now. I think we're all being asked to connect the dots in a bigger fashion that the busyness of life did not allow us to do. So what I'm working on my third book now, and that I've already got my cover, I've already got the outline, I'm working on that. And so the next 2 years is about how may I survive in a way that I live in a place of peace and joy despite the changes, because I still believe there's a lot of changes ahead. And how do I bring hope to others? And hope for me means harness our power every day. And so I don't have a big plan 2 years out, Mark. I think there's so much going on that I'm not sure what it will be. But I will tell you this, is I do believe there's something good on the other side of this.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think I use the word reset quite a lot lately because I think both the world itself, from an environmental point of view, as well as the human species on the planet, we're all going through a bit of a reset. And when anything resets, it usually starts off at ground zero again and gives us a great opportunity to build something fantastic. So I'm on that train.
Well, and I agree with you. And I do think it's important that we all allow ourselves room to grieve what it used to be, because there are systems in place all over the world that need to be let go, Mark. There were systems that did not work. There were systems that were corrupt. And that's going to be what we're facing right now. We've got this 1 foot in the past and 1 foot in the future, and we're straddling this place called the present. And depending on what day it is, that straddling seems to be getting wider and wider and wider.
It's a shame I didn't have a wider camera shot then, because I thought that was an interesting display. But I totally agree with you. Now, for people out there who are rethinking their career path, what do you say to them at the moment in terms of some of those doubts they've got? Because let's face it, people are saying, well, I don't actually do what I love doing every day. Now might be the time to change that. What do you say to those people?
I believe that we're going to each have to tap into, that we each have the opportunity to tap into what makes your soul sing. I believe that we're entering a period of time, a golden age of transparency and respect, and that we will no longer be able to live a divided life where we are one person at home and one person at work. It takes too much energy. And so whatever it is that you end up being, find a place where you can be your whole self. Mind, body, soul, and spirit. Because when we find that purpose, that energy, and that alignment inside, it radiates from the inside out, and people cannot help but follow.
Yeah, absolutely true. What do you say to young people? Because often, like people of your and my generation, we go through a process of decades to get to where we are today and to see the light. What do you say to younger people, though, who haven't had that life experience yet? How do you get them through that process to follow their heart?
Tap into your knowing. I believe that we're going to lay down that mantle that you have to be around for a certain number of years to have the experience, because the reality is, Mark, there's a lot of things that are going to be redone that we didn't do very well. And so to the young people, I believe they're coming in with a fresh slate. They're actually not, I don't want to say tainted, but they're not influenced too heavily by the way things used to be. So trust what you know with a capital K, because you were born at this time for a reason, and you bring a special perspective to the world. Experience is not the only barometer for success.
So what do you think of the social media world? Because you're somebody that's been through business prior to social media even existing, and now you're somebody who's embraced it fondly to do what you're doing. What are your thoughts around social media and what it brings to our society today?
So I am a big believer in balance. Mark, I have worked in the tech industry. I've had real concerns about the tech industry. There's a lot of really good things that come with it, and there's a lot of dangerous things that come with it. I believe that we are out of balance. I believe that the best use of technology and social media is to have tech and then have the wisdom to use it. And like lifting a weight, if we were lifting a weight where they both were equal, that would be terrific. But my biggest concern right now is that we have so much dependence on tech that we're now toppled over onto the tech and onto the social media and onto all of that. And when we are too plugged into tech and we've lost sight of the wisdom to use it, it will have a host of unintended consequences. So I believe social media can be a good thing if you balance it with being completely unplugged. I turn my internet off every night.
Yep.
I make sure that there are hours every day that I turn off the phone. Balance is going to be the real calling for us all as we move into the future.
I know the answer to the question, but are you someone that meditates?
Absolutely.
And what's the power of meditation for you?
For me, it's to still my mind and it's to connect with the universe. I have to be in nature. That was the one thing I really discovered during all of this is I crave being out in nature. I crave being centered with the breath. I crave tuning into the nature because I believe that nature actually offers us a lot of wisdom about leadership. If we as leaders could begin to tune into the wisdom of nature, it would be very, very powerful. We would begin to understand the cycles. We would begin to understand the symbiotic and circular flow of relationships. I believe nature is our biggest teacher.
Yeah, lovely
point. So
point.
That's where I tune in.
Meditation, are you seeing it as something that's being adopted by more and more leaders across the world?
I see people wanting to spend more time on self-care. They're noticing that we cannot continue to go at the same pace that we are. And for the first time, I'm actually talking about this with both men and women much more. Self-care is no longer optional. The only way we will make it through this enormous amount of change, because as a systems thinker, I mean, I've got mathematical formulas that I could show you what the mathematical formulas were for change. We will not make it through it if we don't find a way to meditate and do that self-care. It is no longer optional.
So someone who's out there today struggling with the challenge of their business that may be going under at the moment, what advice do you pass on to them to help them through that process?
Give in to the pull. The one thing that I did when I lost my business is I hung on for 9 months too long. It was dead. And because I had this belief and this perception is, oh, if I work hard enough, I can do it. If I push hard enough, I'll make it happen. Do your endings as well as you do your beginnings. And if you find that it's time for that to end, then do it well with every bit of energy and care and love as you have, and then open yourself up for the new beginning.
Yeah, beautiful. We've rushed through our time today, but I've got one last question that I want to ask you. I could talk to you for hours, but I think I'm going to have you back on the show because there's lots of things that I want to
We're kindred spirits,
talk
Mark.
to
I
about.
appreciate the energy.
Absolutely. So the last thing I wanted to ask you was, if you weren't doing what you're doing today, what would you be doing?
I would be a backup dancer for some fabulous band.
Fantastic. Fantastic answer. Fantastic answer.
Maybe even be a drummer, but it would be something fun in the arts.
Well, I'll tell you what, you should go and listen to one of the podcast shows I did recently. I had a gentleman from the UK who was a roadie for Madonna, Tina Turner, Metallica, and some others. And he shared some brilliant stuff about that behind the scenes stuff with those people. So I'm sure you'd love it. Kimberly, it's been wonderful having you on the Global Business Podcast show today. Thank you very much for your time. And send my best wishes to everybody in Greenville, South Carolina, because I love that place and I hope to get back there one day soon.
I absolutely will. And Mark, thank you for the light that you bring to the world and inspiring us all to step out of our comfort zone. Much appreciated, my friend.
Thank you, Kimberly.